Hello, I am Louis here with Joanna, Liliana, and Samantha. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Today we're going to be talking about the documentary Exterminate All the Brutes by Raoul Peck and how it relates to ethnic studies and the spirit of remembering history together, which is the theme of our chapter 3. Exterminate All the Brutes covers uh history about white colonialism and white power and genocide all the way from its beginning and the crusades all the way to the Holocaust and modern day genocide. um let's start with segment 1.
Um, so I'm gonna introduce myself before
Oh
I.
yes.
So my name is Samantha Cordero, and I am currently a senior here at Cal State Fullerton. I will be graduating next week actually, and I am a child and adolescent development major. I'm also a transfer student, so I transferred from Rio Hondo College in Whittier, and there I majored in early childhood development. So I have my degrees in that. And then I transferred over here to Fullerton in fall of 2020, so like COVID year. And then I do want to be like a preschool or elementary school teacher. I've worked with kids from 3 years old up until eighth grade, and I realized that I love working a lot with the little ones. So hopefully that's what I want to do actually. So hopefully I get like my career path soon and start doing that. But yeah, so that's like a little bit about me.
That's awesome. I hope you really are successful with your goals. You can do it. Do you
Thank
mind
you.
if we all introduce ourselves?
Yeah, everyone else can go. Yeah, you guys too.
Thank you. My name is Louis Lapara. I'm a junior at Cal State Fullerton. I transferred from Fullerton College. My major is psychology. Um, at Fullerton College, for my graduating class of almost like 1,000 people, I was one of 20 award recipients for the Student of Distinction Award, which is pretty cool. We were first in and first out of the graduation ceremony, and they gave us a scholarship. My dream is to be a researcher in psychology and try to help the community of people who suffer from a mental illness. And that's all for me.
That's really cool, Luis.
Thank you.
But you all deserve that scholarship. It's really amazing.
Thank you.
Um, well, I'm Joanna. My name is Joanna Garcia. I'm 21 years old and I'm a liberal studies major. I am set to graduate with my bachelor's degree from Cal State Fullerton this spring as well. I transferred over from Long Beach City College and I want to be a teacher as well. I am looking more towards the middle school ages and maybe math. But I really enjoy taking classes such like these, like Chicano studies, really learning about where I came from, where my parents grew up, and how my parents lived as well. So it's really interesting to see how things were at one point and how much has changed and how much hasn't. So this is a reason why I really enjoy learning a lot about our history.
Yeah, I think that's cool that we have a lot of like similarities like with the teaching stuff. But my name is Liliana Torres, and I am a fourth year sociology major as well, graduating this spring. I grew up in Southern California, and I'm a very big family person, I would say. I enjoy being around people and learning about new things. And after graduating this semester in sociology, I plan on applying to CSUF or to County San Bernardino for their multiple subject credential program. I also want to be an elementary education teacher and hopefully get my bilingual certification with that.
That's awesome. So we have two teachers.
3, yeah.
Three. Oh, yes.
Yeah, three.
Almost.
Almost.
I think with that we can get started. We can now actually move on to segment one.
So for segment one for the podcast project, we're supposed to talk about the entire semester's engagement with the podcast and some specific examples along with the documentary. So for the documentary, it does show how many of them were like racialized and like especially like indigenous people. And I don't know if you guys remember, but like in the beginning and in the one of the podcasts that he had uploaded, they talked about like the song and how they were like dressed up and like mocking them and all that stuff. So I feel like that one is like a really big example of that. And how they would just like kind of like make noises. And then at the end of like the video or of the song, they kind of showed them like dressed up. And I feel like that already alone like shows how much like it like used to be back then. And it could still be like that, but I feel like it has like changed like a little bit. But that was one of the things that I had watched, well, that I had seen from the documentary that had like stood out to me for a little bit, especially like it already being like in the beginning of the video. So like that was one of the things. And it also showed like how like during like in the beginning of the video too, it showed like a little bit of like Trump's like when he was like running for president and all that stuff and how like he viewed things and how like everyone else viewed things too. So I feel like that also shows like how much like everyone was like racialized or could still be racialized. That's what I had gotten from it. And I feel like it could also like relate to like past like podcasts or articles that we could relate to, because in the beginning of the semester too, we had also learned about like the Panama Canal and how they would like treat people differently just because of like who they were, or how, like no one would be treated the same or not like get paid equally. Or like another example could be like how for like the Muslims they wanted them to like change their religion, and if they didn't, then they basically kind of like abolished them from like the area, and then when they would try to like move into like other places, like they still wouldn't allow them just because of like their past. So I feel like that's like another thing, like how it could relate to like the past like podcasts and projects that we have learned about. So yeah, it was just like it just basically showed like a lot of that. Um I don't know what else you guys had like interpreted from like the documentary or stuff like that, or other stuff that you guys like felt like stood out to you a lot in the documentary.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
What you said about Trump was from the part one of the documentary. I
Yeah.
think it was about 15 minutes, and a little less or a little more.
Yeah, it
And
was
he
like
said,
more from the beginning, yeah.
we have a lot of immigrants coming in, or trying to. We're stopping a lot of them. These aren't people, they're animals.
Mhm.
I think it's pretty much what he said, I think.
Yeah, I know. It like kind of like, especially like nowadays, you would feel like, because obviously like everyone knows how like things were before in the past, which is like sad to know. But I feel like now like people should be like more like have different like views of it. You know, like everyone still has like the views of it, but I feel like he also like shouldn't really have like obviously not have made that comment like at all. You know, like everyone like just because of how they are, who they came from, how they look like everyone still has feelings. Obviously, it's gonna like hurt a lot of people, but he thought he was doing something with that. And so, yeah, I don't know. It was just like wasn't necessary to make, you know?
I think he approves of European immigrants, but
Yeah.
not African or Middle Eastern. He banned a lot of Middle Eastern countries and Asian countries from coming here during the pandemic.
Yeah,
And
I remember that. Yeah.
of course, a lot of people doesn't want them here either. He wants just the white immigrants.
Yeah, like during the pandemic, he would make like a lot of like unnecessary comments, calling it the Chinese virus and all that
Yeah.
stuff, which really isn't like okay to say. But yeah, I remember him making like those types of comments too. So he does have like a bias like towards all that. And yeah.
I think especially just since he was someone in power and someone who was supposed to represent like the whole country technically, for him to be speaking the way he does and publicly giving himself this image, it just kind of shows a lot of how much that we think we have progressed as a country, how much we really haven't. Um, because just for the country itself to have allowed Trump to even step foot into the presidential office, it's still very baffling, at least to me. especially when we hear some of the things he has said in the past. Some of them you guys mentioned. There's a lot of things that he has said about women themselves, his own daughter. He has spoken ill of all Latin Americans. And like Luis was saying, not only Latin Americans, he just, if you're not European, if you're not white, in his eyes, you're, as we have seen in like the documentary and some of the films, they say they're dirty, which is so similar to just everything that we've been reading in this class. And it's crazy to think that we've, like, in our heads, we often think like, oh my God, like we don't live in that time anymore, yet we allowed a person like that into office to have control of the whole country, which is still very, kind of a sign of how much there is still to change.
Yeah, it kind of is like alarming.
For me, like with the first example that you gave about like the sailors and how they were like dancing around the museum, I feel like especially because it was like in the beginning of the video, it kind of like shocked me to see that. And I feel like it just like goes to show like that it's like a clear result of like the colonial and exploitation of that community that I just thought was really interesting.
I know. It wouldn't, I think it's just how I started off like that. Like I wasn't like, I don't know like what to expect from it when I first like clicked on the video or anything. But for it to start off like that, I was like, wow, like I feel like that was just like already saying a lot about how the documentary was gonna go, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything else about this part of the segment.
I think it connects really nicely into segment two. Segment two, it talks a lot about genocide, and specifically how communities face genocide, annihilation, and extermination. I want to start off this segment with a quote. It is from the text titled The U.S. Colonization of Northern Mexico and the Creation of Mexican Americans. And the quote states, "The bodies swayed back and forth, coming in contact with each other. Convulsive shudders shook their frames. The muscles contracting would relax and again contract, and the bodies withered most horribly. While thus swinging, the hands of two came together, which they held with a firm grasp till the muscles loosened in death." And if we let that sink in a little, it's really sad to think about. And just from hearing the quote, I pretty sure you guys can kind of visualize what occurred here just from that alone. And this was pretty much Mexicans that were killed in their own country. They were put out for display for the people and everyone around them to see. They wanted everyone to know, and the whole point was to cause fear. They wanted to install that dominance in the people of who was in charge and what they should be afraid of if they do not comply with their demands. And it was extremely similar to a scene in Raoul Peck's documentary, and it was at about the end of the first segment, like minute 49. Pretty much it was an African man and they killed him in front of the people, and it was done the same way. It was to show an example to everyone else that if they didn't get enough work done, that they would be killed as well. And then they made another African man cut the dead man's hand off. In both of these scenes, we could see how they used murder to install fear in the people. And I'm sure we all know many other instances where this was done to just get people's attention and get control of them. I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that.
I just want to say that the way violence was used just 150 years ago, 200 years ago, cutting off your hand, for not me. Wasn't it the rubber or something they had to get, they had to make?
Yeah.
And I think now we're we don't see that as normal, but at any time a war or something like that could happen again, whoever comes into power.
Yeah, it really just kind of, for me, it was very shocking, just to see so clearly. But we could, it was just there was always more to come. In another part, the this one is another from another one of the readings. This one's titled "The American West and the Nazi East." And this one, the text stated, the Slavic world he believed had to be conquered and colonized and its population vanquished. This one was talking about Adolf Hitler. We all are very familiar with Hitler, his actions, and his genocide that he carried on. And basically, the text just talks a lot about how he believed to see it and the way that he kind of what he wanted to do. So he just really thought that all the Jews should be annihilated. He believed they were dirty as well. He did not think they should be there, and if they were not pure blood, they did not deserve to live. It was very this in itself, this text, it reminded me when I was watching minute 36, 37. It was basically a map of the United States, and we can see how it was being kind of taken over by Americans. And little by little, the map begins to change color and it turns green. The green map, it turned gray. So the more it changed color, the more territory they acquired. And this did not just mean they were just, oh, we found more land. It was, they were killing everybody that was already on that land and taking it. And we can see how they were easily just mass murdering people to take what they wanted. And it's very similar to the article on Adolf Hitler, because a lot of his thing was also territory. He would do anything and everything to get to where he wanted. And similarly to the video where it shows us, there was no one to stop them. No one really stopped Hitler. He ended up stopping himself. But it was only when it was after he had already caused so much damage. And it was just very, I guess, to see the actual map changing and how it was, it puts it in a different perspective when you think about that it's not just land being taken over, but it was lives being taken away from people. And I have one last connection. This one is on The Notion of Immigrants by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. And this one is just pretty much the nation's, they changed what the nation, the slogan. And it went from having, we provide immigrants with, basically we provide them with a home and a status and somewhere where they can come and really make a life for themselves, to basically neglecting immigrants. So even in the government and the laws and everything of that, we can see how they're beginning to kind of shut out immigrants and make it's just Americans and we don't want anyone else coming into our country, when we have information like the one I just went over, where we were the ones that were taking over everything. So I thought it was a really good thing to add on, because it was just so similar to that, where we have now changed into this image of, or this mindset of, oh, people are taking over and they're taking our jobs and they're taking this from us and that from us. However, if we think back, this to begin with was stolen land at one point.
That reminds me of something I learned in another Chicano history class. Have you heard about the repatriation of the during the Great Depression?
I believe so.
During the Great Depression, there was no jobs, so the American government deported all the Mexican Americans and mostly Southern California. They
Mm-hmm.
deported, I forget if 3 or 10 million Mexican Americans, even if they were born here, were citizens, just so jobs would be secured for the white
Yeah,
Americans.
yeah, it came to mind now. But that's a really good example. Thank you, Louis.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Um,
Yeah, I think it's just like sad how you had mentioned before that lots of like lives were taken over this just because of like territory, and then they wanted to show like them like what would happen, like kind of like fear taking over. I just think it's like very sad that like they thought that where things had to like go that way, you know?
yeah, yeah, it just shows how much, and especially with all the protests and everything going on right now, it just shows how we can so easily just go back to that.
Yeah.
And we always wonder, like, why did anyone let Hitler do that? Why did the Indians let them just take over like it? And we're looking at what's happening now, and it's very insane to think that we're living history now and we are here not really noticing the rest of the world.
Mhm.
Yeah, I wanted to touch back on, I think, like the second example you had given, of like how the Native Americans also went through like somewhat of an experience, I guess, that's like a smaller but also very wide version of the Jewish genocide, and colonization that they went through, being taken away from their homes, the killing of their people, being used for labor, and like being mistreated and all that. And I think that that's just like the reality that's been discovered and shown through like the ethnic studies perspectives that we've learned like throughout the class.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. I think that was a really good point to move on to segment 3.
I am Lewis. I'll be doing segment 3. Segment 3 is about collective witnessing of history and how it is intimate, embodied, present, and ongoing. I think it is, of course, it's ongoing and a present day issue because just in 1991 in Sweden, and Sweden is one of the most tolerant countries of Europe, and this was from the first episode of Exterminate All the Brutes, around 8 minutes and 20 seconds. There was the white Aryan resistance in Sweden at that time, and they said all Jews and Negroes ought to be exterminated. We shall be victorious. The other races will disappear and die out. And all throughout all 4 episodes of the documentary, it talks about how exterminate and genocide and white power kind of always go together if you understand what it means. It means that it also says in the documentary that the lower races, the savages, the brutes, they're destined to die out, and only the superior race or white race will remain, and it's their duty to help them along the way. And that was a resistance in Sweden in 1991, and all it takes is for people to support it, the majority, and it can become a real problem. And that can happen in the United States too, not just in Sweden. So that's one example I wanted to touch on how it's personal and relevant and so happens today. The other thing I wanted to talk about is also from the first episode, around the 24-minute mark. It talks about the what he calls it the first appearance in history of white power and genocide, and it happened with the Catholic Roman Church in the Crusades. It says the Christian kingdom of northern Spain, with the approval of the Roman Catholic Church and other European monarchies, decided to take control of Muslim trade routes. But the ultimate goal was not just to win over souls to Christianity, but it was for wealth, and it was power through annihilation or killing of the Muslims. And then in 1478, the Pope approved the establishment of the Spanish Inquisition, which the Spanish Inquisition was just investigating the cleanliness of the Moorish and Jewish converts to Christianity. If you were a white Catholic, or then you were clean. But if you were any race that wasn't European white and Catholic, you were of unclean blood. And that's where the idea of white power comes from the Spanish Inquisition of 1478. The final point I want to touch on how it's still a modern day deal, genocide and white power and everything that comes along with it, with racism, which pretty much what it is that uh, it said in the documentary that Germans are made the only scapegoat for extermination of Jews, which is not true. It says that there are other historical events that are very similar that can be compared about other European extermination and mass murders. It said one about Vietnam and in the mid 1900s, another one in Africa. So yeah, it's still a very real thing, and I don't I think it can happen. Maybe not in our lifetime, but I think it will surely happen again eventually.
I feel like it's very scary to think about that. It There's a possibility that something can happen again like that. Like I mentioned earlier, with the genocide that's going on over at Gaza, it's going on and we know it, and we've seen videos and we've seen images, and we know the body count and everything. And just as no one is doing nothing to help them, if something were to happen in the United States, it sure would be very similar, because everyone kind of seems to live their own lives and go on about it. And I think being here in this time and actually being able to see something like that is the only way that we're able to realize how something like that can happen, and how everyone just seems to bypass it.
That also reminds me of how they can make it happen about gun control. If we have no guns, then how can we defend ourselves? And but there's also a real issue about safety. But I think just to take it back one unit in chapter 2, they mentioned that the gun bearing laws of the Constitution were just to uh keep the slaves in check in that time. And it's so much to think about. I really don't think we have the time today, but I think it is a major issue point too.
If we're all past that, we could always move on to the next point. I don't know if anyone else has something else to add.
Um, I think that we can move on. And I have the final section, which is more so connecting the documentary Exterminate All the Brutes to what we've learned in the past units, so being unit 1 and unit 2. So Exterminate All the Brutes is the series, and I feel like it explores like all the exploitation and colonial realities of racism and like the near extinction of a lot of diverse communities that we've seen, more so through white supremacy. And this documentary shows a lot of concepts of how these ideas and experiences have affected these groups. And I think Samantha had touched on it, but in the discussion between Dr. Obando and Mariana, I think was her name, they they like immediately begin talking about like how she said of the sailors and how they were playing like the song in the background and how the sailors were dancing around the museum mocking the natives. And they're kind of just jumping around, circling and making noises like animals. And I feel like this is just the clear depiction of stereotyping and how individuals outside of these cultures are seeing them. And the sailors thought of them as savages and as people who didn't know anything. And I feel like this example ties back to Unit 1, which we had seen the film Apocalipto. And in this film, the media also kind of depicts the Mayans as savages and like a violent population. They were seen as savages and that they simply wanted to kill without mercy, take over. And this ties back to temporal oscillation, which in week 5 is defined as offering a critique of how the past is brought forth, critical practice in decolonial reclamation, and holistic retrieval. And popular culture, like these films, attempts to manipulate these views of these cultural beliefs and kind of change how they're perceived. And this is damaging. And for members of these communities, like it's a very like disrespectful thing of being seen as like evil and savages and just completely not who they are. And this beginning scene, like how Samantha had said, like it was just really shocking and it kind of goes to show like what the rest of the documentary will be about. And another example from this and how it ties back to another unit, there was another scene which they speak about how Belgium's King Leopold II managed to secure all of Congo as his private property. And with the conquering of Congo, he took advantage and he forced the people like to supply labor and to supply products without any payment. So they were mistreated in the sense that those who like refused, they had their villages burned down, their children murdered, women murdered, and their hands cut off. And I felt that this example related to, I believe it was Unit 2 with the bananas, like the banana enclave in Central America. And I remember in the NPR podcast, um, the one who was, I think he was doing the interviews, he kind of explained that like all of these experiences in Limon and Minor Keith, the businessman, he wanted to build this empire outside of the US. And when he needed workers, and after trying with different communities like from China and Europe, he kind of ended up recruiting these Jamaican workers. And the workers there were treated badly and seen as unskilled. So the United Fruit Company arose through all this discrimination and segregation of its workers. And they not only needed to provide labor to carry the banana bunches, but they also had to work on building the railroads to transport all of the goods. And the workers worked in harsh conditions, which is how a lot of them ended up passing. And this example kind of ties back to the documentary in which the fruit company and the rubber company in Congo relied on the workers for their products and labor. And both of them were mistreated and had little to no choice. So these examples kind of connect and expand on our knowledge that we've emphasized the indigenous and cultural groups that have been affected in our history. And the last example that I kind of wanted to talk about was In the documentary, we hear a quote from Robert Knox explaining, all we know is that since the beginning of history, the dark races have been slaves of those lighter skin. So this quote kind of brings up a question as to who they consider a dark race, whether it's being measured by their complexion or like internally as they believe dark as evil and who they think that is. And an example that I think ties back to this is the experiences of Tule Lake. And in these Japanese internment camps, it was after the bombing of Pearl Harbor and how President Roosevelt adopted this policy in which anyone of the Japanese descent um, were to be forcibly removed and placed into these internment camps. Some of the more popular ones like Manzanar and Tule Lake. And with this example, the Japanese Americans were taken in by the United States, basically as property. So they were moved and had to leave everything behind solely because the US was afraid that they were traitors. So throughout the documentary, we see all these experiences of who they consider the dark race, who have been slaves to those of lighter skin. In this case, the settlers and Europeans who attempt to completely remove their culture. In the camps, they attempt to do this by having the Japanese Americans fill out a questionnaire, which a lot of them were afraid to say yes to both or no to both because they would be maybe removed or placed separately from their families. And by answering these questions, they were forced to give up any of their culture and allegiance to their native home. So the US attempted to get rid of the traitors who they deemed as unloyal to the US by deporting them to their homes, despite living in the US for basically all of their lives. I don't know if anyone has anything else to add to that.
I'll just talk for a minute. We're currently around 41 minutes. The Japanese Americans who said no on the questionnaire were the
Mhm.
no boys because they answered the two questions. Are
Yeah.
you loyal to the US or would you serve in the US Army? And also about Minor Keith. Oh, he made so much money with banana was like a bad fruit because of its shape, but through clever advertising and all that cheap labor he was abusing people from, and the South America, he became super rich. And they white power is a lot of it is about getting power and money through their racism, which is what they did. Minor Keith did. Anybody else has anything else to say?
I think a good point to end on off of this all on is talking about the four main things or going over them to what genocide consists of: exploitation, slavery, conquest, and contempt for aliens.
Mhm.
And if we think on that and end on that point, it's just really baffling to think how there's a list for requirements for genocide.
Yeah, I saw that too. I think that was in the first or second episode of the documentary.
Yeah.
About halfway. Yeah, I was very I don't like it's kind of hard to take it in because it's ugly history of racism, but the information is power.
This has been really interesting discussing this with you guys, and I feel like we really unloaded a lot of information and just very triggering in some ways how deep and meaningful it is and how hard. But it has been great. Thank you guys for your collaborations and your comments.
Thank you.
You're
Yeah.
very welcome. Take care, all.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Okay.